Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Sound Off Podcast with your host Grant Chachere. I'm joined here today with Jerit Roser of Louisiana versus All Y'all. If you're not familiar with Louisiana versus All Y'all, if you live under a rock, he does a lot of high school football stuff across the state of Louisiana, and he also covers LSU's sports as well. So, Jerit, how's it been going? How's it been going so far?
Not too bad, man. Making the most of spring. Spent a bunch of time over at outdoor track state championships this weekend. I've been trying to bounce around to a couple of high school spring practices and whatnot. And man, we were talking earlier. It feels like spring football has flown by this year.
Oh yeah, man. And we're just gonna start with LSU. It's just I think this past like a week ago, it's 2 weeks ago, we had the NFL draft, and there's a lot of big names that got drafted. Of course, Jane Daniels was the second overall pick to the Commanders, and then also he had some Louisiana natives get drafted like Mason Smith, and Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas. So, what are your thoughts about all those guys going to the NFL draft? And three of those guys I mentioned you actually covered when they're in high school.
Yeah, a lot. I think every year the draft a little bit more than the draft before just makes me feel a little bit older than I was before, because I remember watching some of these guys when they were pretty young and just starting out. I mean, Malik, I remember as a sophomore at Como. Brian Thomas as a freshman winning a basketball state championship at Walker. Mason Smith early on. Um, and then, I mean, some other guys from other colleges in the draft this year as well. Jaquan Jackson from Hanville and Tulane for forever. But, I mean, as far as LSU's program stature and whatnot, when you can have two of the top 6 picks and 3 top 23 picks from the same offense, that says quite a lot. And they've done a hell of a job of putting in recent years receivers certainly and quarterbacks obviously into the league with a couple of recent Heisman winners. And so I think they've kind of in the last few years as a program really established themselves as a much different opportunity for particularly quarterbacks, but guys on offense in general, to compete at a high level in college and go on to the next level. And you're seeing guys like Bryce Underwood and company in high school talk about watching those guys get drafted a couple Thursdays ago and kind of seeing the path laid out before them. Always really cool.
hmm Yeah, and I think one of the things that stood out of the draft is that this is the second LSU quarterback that has been taken in the top three. Top two since 2019. That's the last 5 years. But then also, I think this is the fourth LSU quarterback that has been taken with the first two picks. Yeah, obviously had Jamarcus Russell. I think what was the guy's name? He used to play for the Colts. He was like a one-hit wonder in the NFL. He played in the early 70s. Forgot the guy's name. I think it was like Barch Davis. I don't know, but like I don't know. It's like it was in the 70s. But speaking of, but now with LSU, like 15 years ago, was seen as a quarterback graveyard. Now it seems like it's the place to go. As you just mentioned, Bryce Underwood, the number one overall prospect in the country, he's coming to LSU. So, you know, how much has the how much does the paradigm shift in terms of how LSU is seen as a place where quarterbacks can go and thrive?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think kind of the next step of that is what can be the, what can be the potential for a guy coming straight out of high school to LSU, because Joe Burrow and Jaden Daniels are both transfer guys. Obviously, you checking on the Burt Jones name now as the
Yeah, fair
other?
trade. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what I thought it was. Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, I mean, the two Heisman quarterbacks are transfer portal guys, and so now you wait to see what happens for Nussmeier, Ricky Collins, Colin Hurley, Bryce Underwood, and take that next step where not only are you proving yourself as a good landing spot for a year or two to do some huge things at that position and go on to the next level, but for LSU to be recruiting guys fresh out of high school and be in purple and gold for 3 or 4 years and go do that. And I think with this crew, that group that I mentioned, they're really positioned to take that next step and do some things. I was with Bryce a couple weekends ago at that OT 7-on-7 tournament, and he was just unreal. And Ryan Clark, the former LSU and NFL safety who was coaching that group, kept talking about how blown away he was by where Bryce Underwood was in his development right now as a guy that hasn't even played his senior year of high school. And that's the young guy coming along behind the guys that are already in place. And I think positioned to do some nice things in Baton Rouge. Obviously huge shoes to fill, but a lot of talent in that room still.
Yeah, I mean, and speaking of quarterbacks, as we mentioned LSU, how much has the narrative shifted with how LSU develops quarterbacks, but then also in the state of Louisiana, it seems like the quarterback is really a position like a lot of colleges have really recruited in the state. Obviously, a couple years ago, we had Arch Manning and Eli Holstein and Ricky Collins, as you just mentioned before. They were highly recruited out of high school, but now coming up, you have even the class of 2025, Emil Picarella and Jackson Bradley. And in 2027, you might have two of the top 5 quarterbacks in the country with Peyton Houston and Elijah Haven. So what has really happened in this state in terms of quarterback development? Has it just been better coaches? Has it been more of an offensive focus in the state? Or it's just been just individual quarterback development? We've seen a lot more quarterback coaches in the state.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious about some of that myself. It's probably like most things, a dynamic of multiple factors coming into play. But I think we've seen over time, nationally, but certainly in Louisiana as well, just, some more opened offenses through the years. And you're seeing guys get involved in throwing the ball around at a younger age, involved in doing it year round with some of the 7-on-7 opportunities in different camps and combines. And you mentioned quarterback coaches in the off season and whatnot. And, Sam Spiegelman and I were talking a couple of weeks ago on one of our little convos on Louisiana versus all y'all. It's super early, but I really, as much as we talk about that 2023 class of quarterbacks and that probably being the best class we've seen at that position, I think 2027's position to potentially be better. You mentioned those top 2, and I think there's a ton of depth there that folks are going to start to realize this year probably. Other guys haven't been quite as quick on the radar as Pop Houston and Elijah Haven, but there's a lot of talent at that position that I think we may be looking at, 6 or 7 D1 guys by the end of this in that 27 class. And you mentioned some of the 25s, just some good 26s. And so it seems like we're kind of ramping back up to that 27 group. It's not just kind of a one-off, and we'll see where it goes from there, 28 and beyond, because I've already seen some talented young 28 guys, obviously super, super early in their development, but it's really encouraging for where that position's heading in Louisiana.
Yeah, I mean, I can only remember like when Brandon Harris was coming out of high school, like it was like the first, like, I mean, when you have a big time quarterback like that, it was like, oh, everyone's like, oh my God. But now it just seems like in the last few years, it just seems like there's just a whole bunch of new quarterbacks coming in, and really seems like Louisiana's finally starting to get noticed for its quarterback play. And I think that's a pretty exciting thing. But another position really that really hasn't been, it really only happened recently, but for a while, Louisiana was not really known for producing many great offensive linemen. And they've had some great offensive linemen in the past, of course, but it just seems like it's at a higher rate than it used to be. And then also now you have Will Campbell, who's right now, I saw something like he was the number 1 overall prospect for the 2025 NFL draft. And then also Emory Jones is apparently supposed to be a first-round offensive lineman as well. Both of them are from Louisiana. So why is that why is it now that like Louisiana's getting noticed for its offensive line? Is it because it's just like a lack of scouting that position in the state because of the DBs and receivers? Is it development? Like, what's going on? Because I've wondered that too. Like, I think that I've had conversations with people like that. I can't really give an answer to me. Could you?
No, I don't know. I know that has been kind of the history, and even, Coach Orgeron, when he was still the head coach at LSU, was kind of open about that at times with their struggles to fill that offensive line room with Louisiana talent to the degree and depth that they would have liked. He talked about it it was not a position that this state necessarily produced at as high of a level as some others. And I think you mentioned both defensive line and defensive backs, where there's a reason why LSU has been so traditionally strong at those positions, and it's because the fertile recruiting base at those positions in Louisiana. But really around that time of Will and Emery's high school class, Bo Bordelon and a lot of guys coming through that are in purple and gold now, it is kind of when I started to notice it seemed like there was a little bit more consistency, similar to what we were talking about with those quarterbacks. I wrote a couple of pieces on Prep Redzone Louisiana the last couple of years about just a greater group in terms of not just a top end talent or two here or there, but a consistency of a top guy or two in each class, as well as some depth beyond that to be legitimate high end D1, maybe not all being top SEC tier, but Power 5 type guys, has been a little bit more consistent. And I think we're similar to the quarterbacks, kind of seeing that continue. And that's, whoever is the head coach at LSU now, Brian Kelly and company, or whoever, follows him down the road. It just positions this program to be that much more attractive and well set up to compete at the highest national levels, when you have two positions that Louisiana hasn't necessarily produced at as high of a level as some others suddenly are very much in that mix with that wealth of talent elsewhere on the field.
Yeah, and speaking of offensive line talent, I know in the class of 2025, you have two of the offensive linemen that are in the state are in the top 50 for the class of 2026, which, in my opinion, might be one of, if not the greatest class to come out of the state. With Blaine Bradford, Lamar Brown, Jakeem Stewart, Bryson Martinez. And just a lot of talent in that class of 2026. Do you think that this might be the greatest recruiting class to come out of the state in recent memory, or even ever?
That's always tough to say, especially, when you're watching them at a young age, and you kind of get lost sometimes when you start comparing them to great classes past. You get a little bit skewed because you now have the knowledge, kind of the hindsight of how that class turned out, and certain guys that maybe were a little bit under the radar, but proved themselves as steals over time, or guys that were pretty hyped recruits. You kind of lose track of if they ended up not necessarily living up to expectations. And so trying to make that comparison can get tough just because of human nature. But I know I've been excited about the 26 class for a long time, super excited about the 27 class as well. As much as just honestly, I don't enjoy rankings as much as I have to deal with them and do them. It's not a thing that I particularly enjoy, and particularly early on in guys' high school careers. But I, for Prep Redzone, have to have freshman rankings every year that I am able to push off until they've at least played freshman year, as much as I think folks would like if I had a full rankings going into freshman year. And this 27 class, I've told some folks, is the easiest time I've had filling a rankings list this early on. Of obviously a lot will change, guys will develop at different paces or whatnot, but in terms of seeing the potential there and realizing how many of these guys look legitimate D1 talents early on, it's been the easiest for me to fill that list. And so as much as I love that 26 group, we have at least 2, if not 3 or 4 year run that we're on the verge of that is super exciting.
Yeah, man. And I think, because with yet not only have the class of 2025 has been great for Louisiana. I think there's a lot of great guys, including Keelan Moses and Devin Harper, James Simon, Harlem Berry. There's a lot of great players. The list goes on, and fortunately, I feel like some of those 3-star guys could be 4-star guys because I've seen them play and they look like they can play at the next level. But you have the class of 2025, you have the class of 2026, class of 2027. These 3 classes seem like that this is easy pickings for LSU to have, top 5 classes year in and year out, just because of the amount of guys in each class. But but the reason why I'm saying this is because it's leading to my the next segment, which is Brian Kelly went on had an interview with Jacques Chachere of WAFB in Baton Rouge, and he mentioned it was about the NIL situation, and he basically kind of alluded to the fact that he's not going to buy a player that he feels like is above the market level of what that player is, and that's caused some that's caused a lot of debate on Twitter. I'm pretty sure you may have talked about it with some people. I've definitely talked about it with some people. But what's your overall take, and do you agree with it?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where there's a little bit of nuance to what BK was saying that gets lost in the social media volume and quick reactions and hot takes and whatnot that I've been pretty aware of just in conversations with different members of that staff for a while, what their attitude was with some of the NIL stuff. And as much as it might not fit into a quick quote on a graphic or whatever for people to react to on social media, their attitude is very much they support NIL opportunities for students, for student athletes, but they want to make sure that is not the primary reason why LSU is chosen over elsewhere, because we're not that far removed from a lot of the fan base complaining that LSU under O was recruiting too many out-of-state guys. They weren't tied enough to LSU. It didn't mean enough to them, and so they were quick to transfer out. And so that's something that this staff really wants to avoid, and making sure that sure, that financial piece is a piece to have a conversation, but they want to make sure that LSU is a place for everything else that's involved, the opportunities like we talked about with Jaden, Malik, and Brian and company going on to the NFL, the opportunity to compete for national championships and all those things, that there's a level of prioritization of those things, and then the money can be a conversation after that, and not just, hey, what can you pay me? And let the football side become the less prioritized piece of that conversation. And so I think that's really kind of what Coach Kelly was sharing. And it just kind of got really blown out of proportion in some ways on social media. Cause I mean, NIL is a huge piece of that recruiting game at this point, particularly in the transfer portal, and Brian Kelly and company don't have their heads in the sand over that. They know that, they're aware of that, and they're willing to play ball some, but at the same time, they kind of want to try and keep certain priorities in a different order. And I think the fact that Louisiana is such a hotbed of talent, and they can recruit so heavily high school guys in the state of Louisiana who have grown up for 17, 18 years wanting to play in purple and gold, that kind of gives them that much stronger of an opportunity to lean that way and to not feel like they have to go chase with bags at every turn, because they can build so much of their foundation off of the homegrown talent, who will then, put on purple and gold and make some NIL money as well.
Yeah, and I think, and I've told this to people too about how Brian Kelly approaches the NIL situation. It's like, because I remember early in the transfer portal back in January, February, a lot of people complaining, like, why is LSU not going after these transfer portal targets hard enough, especially on the defensive line and even the defensive backfield. And one of the things I told them is that because these next three classes are so detrimental to how LSU is going to be the next few years, just because all of the talent that's in the state right now, they have to build those relationships with the high school coaches, the high school players, the parents in the state of Louisiana. And because Brian Kelly he's not from the South, nor is he from Louisiana, let alone Louisiana. And that's why he hired all these guys who were either from Louisiana, coached in Louisiana, played at LSU, or played in the state, because he knows who's in the state and who are the dogs in the state. And that's something that LSU has lost the last few years because of the lack of dogs. Not only they've had dogs on offense, but what's more concerning is on that defense. And that's what LSU has been the last 20, 25 years. They've been known for their defense. And Tyrann Mathieu, Mo Claiborne, the list goes on. I mean, just the amount of guys, there was really no dogs. There really hasn't been any dogs on the defense the last few years outside of Harold Perkins, and you can put in Mekhi Wingo. So it's very important that LSU hits the recruiting, high school recruiting, really hard just because of the amount of talent in the state. But they do need to get some guys with the transfer portal, obviously on the defensive line. But moving
Yeah,
on. Oh yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I mean, as much as I understand Brian Kelly and company's stance and everything that I just said of kind of the way they're kind of prioritizing some things, I do think this is a defense that if they're going to go compete for a national championship potentially this year for a college football playoff spot this year, that they clearly feel like there's a spot or two that they still need to bolster, particularly in that defensive front and potentially, also add a defensive back. And so how they kind of manage that for this year, as much as we love these 25, 26, 27 recruits, if you want to go compete for a national championship this year, it seems like their perspective even is in terms of their recruitment of the portal recently that they need to make another move or two. And so it'll be interesting to see how they approach that in this immediate future now, beyond just that bigger picture philosophy.
Yeah. Moving on. I know. Obviously it's the end of college spring ball and the end of the draft, so it's pretty much dead with the NFL and college football. But right now we're entering the high school football season. As the last couple of weeks, high schools around the state have started spring ball. I've been to a few of the spring practices. You've been to a few of the spring practices. What are you most excited about this high school football season in Louisiana?
I'm always excited about high school football in Louisiana. This time of year in the spring is really cool because there's not a game fast approaching. And so it's a little bit more of a laid back vibe to get to go spend some time with the coaches and players and get to know them a little bit more, to see some new faces, some of these underclassmen that are going to step into big roles for their teams. And I guess, as much as anything, we have so many of these young guys that we're talking about, these young 26 and 27 guys that will step into bigger roles this year. And so I really look forward to seeing kind of the last ride for guys like Harlan Berry and James Simon and Jasper Parker, and sticking to just running backs now, apparently for some reason, but a talented 2025 class. But watching these younger guys really continue to come of age in front of us and play big roles for potential state championship contender teams is something that I think is probably top of mind right now, going into the offseason, kind of seeing how they work and prepare for those opportunities.
Yeah, and I'm glad you kind of mentioned the running backs because it just seems like the class of 2025 in the state has a lot of them. As we mentioned earlier, Harlan Berry, James Simon, Jasper Parker for Archbishop Shaw. He's really like just risen up in the rankings. He's gotten all kinds of offers. JT Lindsey of Alexandria, he's committed to LSU a couple weeks ago, right before the spring game. And you got some other great running backs too that have really been slept on. Chad Elsey has recently picked up a few offers. You also have Xavier Ford from Leesville, who's really good. I mean, there's a lot of guys in the state, a lot of running backs in the state that seem like they could be played at the next level. So, what are your thoughts about this class of running backs?
Yeah, phenomenal class of running backs. And we got to mention Nate Shepard, because if we let any bigger of a chip add to Nate Shepard's shoulder, all the other 5A programs in the state are going to be really upset with us, because he feels very underrated, under the radar, despite being absolutely prolific last year and helping the Skippers on their deep playoff run. Somebody that has a lot of offers from around the country, but doesn't get mentioned quite as much as Harlem, James, even Jasper. Doesn't have the LSU offer that JT has, and I think is very much in that mix, that conversation. Deshaun Ford, another great one, and it means that list goes on. You said a bunch. We've added a bunch more. And Jordan Hayes at Ruston is a D1 type guy, and the list continues to go on. There's somebody that's going to be upset that we left him off, but there's 10, 12 guys that are D1 guys at that position in the state for this class.
Yeah, I mean, if we left off somebody, forgive us. It's just a lot. There's a lot of y'all. That's saying a lot to the amount of talent that's in the state. just in the past few years, but especially running back for this class of 2025. Uh, but going more into teams, which team are you the most excited about upcoming high school football season?
Yeah, I guess I haven't started to think a ton about kind of next steps in terms of some sleepers and whatnot. I think I have very much in mind some of these top teams that made deep runs last year and how they kind of handle their next step. Catholic in Baton Rouge this year will be without Daniel Beal for the first time in what feels like a decade. And so how does a really talented Bears team that won a D1 select state championship handle a new face at quarterback? And Rustin, I think, is going to be really talented again, but obviously lost a lot of key pieces on defense to this 2024 class. And so, how do they handle following up their first state championship in 3 decades, knowing that Zachary and Desterhan and others are going to be right there chasing? Central, I think, is going to be really good again after being a surprise team last year for a lot of folks. Evangel, with all of the influx that they had this year, including Pop Houston, are they ready to make a big leap right off the bat this year and be a potential contender in Pop and Company's first year starting as sophomores? Opelousas, with some of the challenges or drama that they've had this offseason with LHSA stuff and whatnot. And I think feeling some vindication in recent weeks with some news that they would be considered state champions. Most of that team was 20 leaders on that team were 25 guys. And so they'll be back and probably, despite being state champions, be a little bit ticked off and want to go repeat and put any kind of doubts or criticisms to bed. But Cecilia, I think, will be good again. And I tell you, one thing that has caught my eye with some of the reclassification stuff is I don't think we'll potentially get a possible Calvary U High playoff matchup. I think they're in different divisions now, which with St. Charles Catholic jumping up, I think a lot of folks were wondering, could we see a Calvary and U High matchup in a semis or finals? And I think U High is now jumped up a class or a division. And that's something that both of those teams, I think, are state championship contenders once again, but we may not get a chance to see a matchup that I think a lot of folks hoped we would at some point during these groups' high school careers.
I did not know that. I knew that St. Charles was moving up the division because it was announced, I think, during the season last year that they were moving up because St. Charles, they're trying to make the move to 5A in the next few seasons. And that's not rumors. Coach Stein said that himself. Like, they're trying to join the Catholic League, which is which that's actually pretty awesome that he just came out and said that, because a lot of coaches wouldn't be bold enough to say that, yeah, we're trying to make these moves. But like, I mean, that's what happens when you go to 3 or 4 straight state championships and won 3 out of the last 4. But
yeah, they're not shying away from anything. When they beat U High in that semifinal, Coach Stein was very quick to shout at me, SCC St. Charles Catholic versus all y'all, that they want any and all smoke that can be sent their way. And so they're making that jump up. But I believe in one of the recent releases from the LHSA that just from a number standpoint, U High happened to creep up and be like the smallest school in the next division now, instead of still being down with Calvary. Because at that OT7 with that flow 7-on-7 team, Mark Miller from Calvary was kind of given the U High guys, Keelan and Man Moses and Jaden Gloston and Zay Martin, a little bit of a tough time. It's like, man, we were hoping we might get a chance to square up with you at some point, but I guess it's just not meant to be.
Right. And I mean, now since we're on it, we might as well talk about the Division II Select, because this seems like now it's just with U High coming up and St. Charles coming up, it just seems like a much more exciting division. Moving on, Jerit, we talked about what teams we're excited about. One of the teams I'm excited about is Central, and I think that they're a team that everyone should watch it for, and then it kind of flying under the radar. But what are some teams that you feel like are flying under the radar that maybe a lot more people need to be focused on, even though they may not be like the Catholics and the Cars and John Curtis's in the state?
Yeah, I mean, I think Central's a good one. As much as they caught folks off guard last year, I don't know if everyone realizes the amount that they bring back in terms of key playmakers from that team, as well as some of the young talent coming through that program. And so that one certainly stands out. I'm interested to see. I mentioned before Opelousas and Cecilia, two teams that made a run to a state championship game. Who is kind of the next super under the radar right now? Probably more mid-sized, more rural community school that is poised to make a little bit of a run. We saw Bunkie take some steps last year. Could they maybe take another step and make a deeper playoff run? I like some of the talent at Marksville. Is that Division III bracket a place where they can potentially surprise some people and make a little bit of a run, maybe reach a quarters, depending on how some things fall? And then at that point, who shows up on a Friday night after Thanksgiving and pushes a little bit farther. I don't know that I've thought about it enough to not feel like I'm going to leave somebody off, but those are ones that stand out to me. There's some good talent at Eastville right now. Could they kind of make another playoff run for the first time in a couple years? Maybe make a little bit deeper of a push after falling short in the second round last year. Actually, speaking of that, Jerit was a team that beat Eastville in that second round game, made a quarterfinal run last year, and I think people know that good senior group, Travell Frederick and company, was key, but there's a lot of really good 25, 26, 27 talent there with Jerit. And so they might be around and competitive a little bit longer than folks realize. But those are ones that kind of, and I'm interested to see, I just saw Live Oak this week. They've got a lot of young talent. They're working to try and take their next step this year. They've got a lot of 26 and 27 guys, and even 28 and Deuce Urson, who already picked up a Southern offer that they'll be relying on. And so whether they're ready to kind of make a little bit of a push this year, I think time will tell, but there's somebody to watch for these next few years with some more D1 talent coming through Watson than we've seen in the last few years.
Yeah, Central is a team that I'm really excited about. I feel like even though I think they made some noise last year, especially in the playoffs, I think I don't think people realize how much they're bringing back from that team, including the Mays brothers, who both gave D1 offers. They can bring back a very underrated quarterback in Jackson Furman, who I think is going to be able to take the next step his senior year and his third full season, I believe, is starting as a quarterback over there for the Wildcats. And I think the one thing a lot of people like, I remember when they go into the playoffs, they were like an 7-3 team, and really they were listed as like an 18 seed, but in my opinion, they're probably like a top 10 seed. I think if they didn't lose that first game because a De La Salle team that really wasn't that great last season, they would. I think if they finished season 8-2, they would be a top 10 seed. But that loss was really bad enough where it knocked them right into that. I believe that was the 18 seed, and that was. And when I saw who they were playing, I'm like, oh my god, they could make a run. And then they beat the crap out of East St. John, which I wouldn't say it shocked me, but I was like, oh, this seems a lot better than I thought it would be. And I told you, I called Jason LeJeune of Gurnard. I was like, hey, man, the Central team might beat Neville next week. I'm not even joking. And they did. And then really, and you could call it a robbery. I guess you could say it was a robbery. I'm not trying to hurt anybody's feelings, but, I think they could have made it to a state championship, because they should have beat Zachary last year. And I think if they won because Zachary in the playoffs again, I think they could have beat them. But that's one team to watch out for. I think another team to watch out for, I mentioned this before, was JFK. They're bringing back a lot of great players from the year before. James Evans and Kitchen Jones are two of the best receivers in the state. Darrensburg, he's going to play DB in college, but he's also a fantastic quarterback right now for the Cougars. And they bring back some experience on the offensive line and on the defensive side of the ball as well. I think they're poised to take the next step. They made back-to-back quarterfinal appearances, and this JFK program looks like they could be the next big-time program out that's in New Orleans. But I think another school that I think that's kind of flying under the radar right now, I believe I think it's Alexandria, in my opinion. I think Alexandria, they have a lot of talent come back this year. JT Lindsey's another fantastic back. And last year, they almost upset Carr in the playoffs, they almost had a comeback victory against the Cougars, and I think they could make some noise, especially in select, because it seems like they always get slept on every year just because they may not be like as big as like the Catholics or the Brother Martins, who you name it, but they always are going to have talent each year in and year out, and they're always going to be one of those teams that might pull off an upset or two. But Jerit, is there any other teams that you think might be a sleeper team?
Man, I don't know. We've hit on a lot of them. And no matter how deep we go, we're gonna frustrate someone that was the next left off. I think we've hit on a lot of good ones for sure. Um, I'm this is I haven't talked to him. I don't know kind of what the expectations are in year one down there, but I'm definitely interested to see just another program worth mentioning, things to watch this fall. Jess Curtis at Southside now,
Mm-hmm.
after
Yep.
all those years back up in his old stomping grounds at Manny, and then a year at Natchitoches Central. He now comes south and takes over Southside, and so that'll be an interesting storyline in that area. A guy coming from out of area with a huge track record and resume to him, and kind of how he adjusts to them and them to him as he takes over that Sharks program. But I mean, might as well mention Union Parish, another one that kind of every time they graduate someone, they start to get overlooked a little bit, and you could tell Spat and them were pissed off last year that they felt a little bit overlooked when Trey Holly was off to LSU, and now Jamarion is off to college, and that 24 class is off to college. And so as much as some folks might want to say, okay, maybe the Farmers take a step back, he's going to have this next group fired up and ready to go make another run. St. James will be really, really talented again. They'll have to replace their quarterback and Braden Williams and his favorite target and Kobe Brown. But I mean, there's just going to be a lot of fun this fall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also another team worth mentioning. Well, Southside's like, I'm glad you mentioned Southside. I mean, when Fano was leaving to take a school board position, I'm like, okay, they're gonna hire somebody that's big time, and I wouldn't be surprised if they hired Just Curtis. I think that was because I know like that's one of the reasons why he left Manny, was because he was trying to look for a big time 5A opening, and apparently there's a lot of rumors that he was willing to take the West Monroe job, which of course is one of the best jobs in this state. But the Southside job open, and he took it, and everyone knew that Southside was the next beast incarnate in the state of Louisiana, just because they have one of the highest. I believe they have the highest population increase of any city in the state of Louisiana, or like one of, if not the highest. But another school I think that's worth mentioning too, because speaking of lost players, and they tend to prove everybody wrong year in and year out, is Easton. Even though Easton's going to be facing against tougher competition this year as they join the Catholic League, they're another program that's like, even though they lose a bunch of guys, they seem like they're that team that takes the next step. They might make a semifinal push or even a state title game push year in and year out. I'm not saying that because I'm biased, because obviously my ties to Easton, my mom teaching there, and of course, my little brother Jackson will be playing for them next year. But speaking of the Catholic League, I think we might as well move that as you're an alum of Jesuit. There's a lot of moving pieces, like Easton joined the Catholic League. Carr will still be in the Catholic League these next 2 years. But then St. Aug will have a new coach in Robert Valdez. That was another big time hire. I think that was an A+ hire, along with Southside hiring Jess Curtis. Carr's bringing back a lot of players. Brother Martin, year in and year out, just seems like, yeah, they might be losing some players, and then they finish the season 7-3, 8-2, and finish like second or third in the Catholic League. John JT got, and his John Curtis Patriots. You can never count them out. Jesuit, of course, you don't know what Jesuits are going to do. Holy Cross, you don't know what they're going to do in year 2 of the Scott Wadney era. In the Catholic League right now, what's the most intriguing storyline going into next year?
I think it's loaded again. You just, rattle off a lot of those storylines. I'm glad you mentioned Brother Martin as a team that ends up getting a little bit overlooked at times, but is as competitive as anyone. Had a chance to knock off Carr this past year, even with all those new faces that the Crusaders were relying upon. And I think there's an expectation with that much more experience now returning after graduating that big 23 class. That young team last year, really I thought stepped up and played well over the course of the fall. And so I think they'll be more in the mix than maybe people realize. But Carr is Carr, and Carr is going to be pissed off and have a chip on his shoulder. Curtis, same, after some of the stuff with the LHSA and the record dynamic and all that down the stretch. And then the way that Catholic game ended in the playoffs, they're going to come back fired up. Easton, it's hard to say anyone would have a bigger chip on their shoulder than Easton after the way last year went for them. And so when you add another of the top 5 or 10 annually programs in the state in Easton into the mix of what was already the toughest district in the state, and just make it that much more competitive, putting another top tier opponent on everybody's schedule, it's going to be a lot of fun all season long. They've got so many good teams in there. It seems like they start playoffs almost by week 3 or 4 or whatever it is.
Yeah, just kind of going back to brother Martin. I know you mentioned that they beat Carr. They didn't beat Carr, but it seemed like they did because the way Coach Bryce Brown was doing it.
Yeah. I was saying they gave him a scare, had a chance to beat Carr.
Yeah. Okay, I may have misheard because I know they beat Holy Cross. I know that shocked a lot of people considering how hot Holy Cross was up to that point. It seemed like Holy Cross was putting points on everybody but Brother Martin, and it's because of their defense. But I'll say this. They did lose their defense coordinator, Adam Giglio. He will now be the defense coordinator at Shaw, which I think we'll get to in a second in this podcast. But I think another team we forgot to mention, and I can't believe I missed them too. There's so much teams in the Catholic League now, you're going to leave out one, but that's Rummel. Rummel, of course, they had that surprise run to the semifinals, even though they finished the season 4-6 last year in the regular season. They had some quality wins, including over a very talented U High team, which shocked a lot of people. It just seemed like, and they also beat Curtis in overtime, but they were up and down throughout the whole year. But they got in the playoffs, and they had not only had a favorable draw, but they got hot at the right moment. They upset Captain Shreve. They went on the road to St. Paul's, beat St. Paul's, and nearly beat a Catholic team. And if the game doesn't get rained out the night before, they had a solid chance of upsetting Catholic. So what's kind of intriguing about this Rummel team coming in, considering the fact that they're bringing back a good bit of players from that team from last year?
Yeah, I think a combination of kind of what I had said about Brother Martin in the sense that they were a relatively young team last year, got a lot of guys that are back now and experienced. A combination of that and what I said about Curtis and being frustrated with the way things ended and feeling like they got robbed a little bit up at Memorial Stadium against Catholic and didn't like the way it ended, felt like a controversial call or two went the wrong way for them. And so just another chip on another set of shoulders in that Catholic league as everybody chases Catholic High and Baton Rouge, and a lot of talent in that New Orleans Catholic League.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and now moving on, I'm going to have to talk about Shaw because I mentioned them, a former Catholic League team, and they're vying to get back in the Catholic League sometime too once they get their enrollments up, and other stuff has to happen as well. But this Shaw team is really poised for a state title run. Of course, they bring back their quarterback, Mason Wilson. Jasper Shaw is coming back. Jacob Washington, the receiver, is one of the top receivers in the country. It just seems like Shaw is Shaw. That's what Shaw is supposed to be. And under Coach Tierney is back now. And then also bring in one of the best young defensive minds in the state. I can't believe I'm saying young defensive minds like I'm older than them. Like I'm 25. I'm talking about like the dude is almost 40. Like I'm sounding like an old guy, but he is. He's gonna be a guy. He's gonna be in a lot of head coaching conversations is Coach Adam Giglio, and I think he's ready to take this Shaw defense to the next level after the great work he's done at both Brother Martin and Holy Cross. Well, what are your expectations about this Eagle team going into the next year?
Yeah, I'm excited about that. I was excited about them last year, and it was good to see them back and playing in the semifinals. And they certainly, for a lot of the year, felt like they were a team that had a chance to push further than that and go compete for a state championship. And so now with that that deep run under their belt, another year under Coach Tierney and company back on the West Bank, a lot of talent back on that team that now has been through some really big time battles. Throughout last regular season and deep into the playoffs. Can this be a year that they go, make that push back to the Superdome? We got kind of caught up before and had a pause and realize, wait, there's so much shifting with some of the divisions and who's where. There's a lot that I think we still have to kind of wrap our minds around at some point when we have official designations of who's in which group. But Shaw's a team that I think, regardless of what the final groupings are, we should expect to see making a deep playoff run.
Yeah. And I also want to mention this too, because it kind of go back to what we're talking about teams to watch out for. There's two teams that really caught my mind since we're on this New Orleans or Southern Louisiana kind of run here with this podcast. But two teams I forgot to mention that I should mention earlier. One is Newman. Newman, I know they lost a good bit of guys, but this Newman team, now with several teams moving up, seem like this is probably arguably one of their better chances to not only get to the state championship game, I believe for the first time in their school history, but also win their first state football title school history, considering the fact that they bring back an excellent quarterback in Eli Friend. Brett Bordelon is anchoring the offensive line. And it just seems they always going to have a really good team. But then also you have to go westward a little bit to Dunham. Of course, they bring back Elijah Haven for his sophomore year. They have one of the best coaching staffs, in my opinion, in the state with Coach Neil Weiner at the helm for the Tigers. But then also, I think I didn't know this, but they also are bringing in Jerome Harris, who is the running back for Southern Lab last year. He was in a rotation with Amari and Asbury. And in the fourth quarter, he really won the game for him with his 2 rushing touchdowns to close out that victory for Southern Lab. He will be the running back for the Tigers now. So with those two teams, what do you expect from them, and how much does their state championship hopes rise, given the fact that we have all this shifted and everything going on?
Yeah, 2 programs that have been knocking at that door for a while now, among the top contenders in that division, and bring back a lot of key pieces, including, when you have a quarterback that can make plays like either one of those guys can with both their arms and their legs, and just you can trust in key moments and deep playoff games, kind of put the trust in them as coaching staffs. I think you have to look at them as having a shot to, can they, in Newman's case, get over the hurdle and get to the Dome, or in Dunham's case, they finally got back to the Dome a couple years ago. Can they take it another step farther? And we're still, it's May 9th, and we're still a ways away in terms of seeing how these teams develop over the summer and fall camp in the course of a long regular season. But those are 2 fantastic small school, select school programs year in, year out, and have great rosters and coaching staffs once again this year.
Mm-hmm. And let's talk a little bit about North Louisiana, because I know there's a lot of talent up there, but especially in the northeastern part of the state. Ruston, of course, they lose a lot of guys, but they're still going to be very talented. But their schedule is tough, I think they play like 3 or 4 Texas schools, 3 or 4 really, really good high school programs out in the state of Texas. Not just like gimmies; they're like some of the best programs in that state. Neville, of course, they had a very disappointing end of the season, but they bring a lot back. West Monroe, of course, they're going to have that big time matchup with Catholic, I believe, the 4th week of the season. Sterlington is going to be back and loaded. Washington Christian is going to be back and ready to load. Who else? Union Parish, which was mentioned earlier. It seems like there's a lot of really good teams in the Monroe northeastern part of the state. So, like, of all the teams I mentioned, which team intrigues you the most? And are there any teams I left off that list that you might want to add?
Yeah, a couple additions. I think I'd give a little shout out to Wassman. Another year under Coach Cahey, returned some good talent and really surprised a lot of people last year with the step that they took. And, Franklin Parish with Coach Burnett out there in Winsboro. I like where that program is. They have I think, set themselves up and have some good talent coming through there. Their quarterback Pook is really an under the radar guy that I think a lot of folks need to watch as a potential, whether quarterback prospect at the next level or athlete, because he's a pretty talented potential receiver or defensive back as well. But the top tier, potentially compete for a state championship type teams. I think the first two that you mentioned in Ruston and Neville are the two of the big schools that really kind of lead that pack for me. You mentioned Sterlington. Oak Grove is another one you mentioned earlier with Jackson Bradley. I think Oak Grove is going to be really good again this year. Coach Gregory has those guys as a top small school program year in and year out. And also, of note, you mentioned some of those non-district matchups with a West Monroe Catholic or some of the Texas Gauntlet for Ruston. Oak Grove and Calvary Baptist kick off the season against one another. And so when we talk about things we're looking forward to about the 2024 high school football season, I think the increased non-district scheduling we've seen over the last several years and some of these marquee matchups we get right off the bat now every single year and every single week, there's a great matchup of title contenders from various regions of the state. That's something that I'm really thankful for this year and the last few.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and kind of moving on to another area of the North Louisiana, we got the Shreveport area. As we mentioned, Calvary Baptist. It seems like the crown jewel of the Shreveport area, as I believe they were the only school to win a state championship out of the area. Considering all the teams that were hyped up going to the playoffs, they all lost early on. Of course, Captain Shreve, they lost in the second round. Airline got upset by Mandeville in the quarterfinals. Parkway had to disappoint end of the season. North DeSoto, I think that was the big one, really. They ended up losing against Opelousas, and that was a team that a lot of people thought was going to be a shoo-in to return to the state title game and even win it. And they had kind of a disappointed end of the season. But what excites you about the Shreveport area in terms of teams, and are there any teams that may be flying under the radar in that area?
Yeah, I think you mentioned the big ones. I think Calvary, as much as we celebrated that 23 state championship, that coaching staff and that roster for this 24 run, I think is really confident, even with some of the guys they'll have to replace, particularly, in that receiving core and in the secondary. They've got guys ready to step up and take over those spots. And so I think they may feel like people think, okay, great, the Cavs won in 2023. Now who's next? And they feel very much like they are the team to beat right now in May and intend to be all season long in 2024. North DeSoto, after that loss to Opelousas, can they get back to where they thought they were going to be? And a lot of folks thought they were going to be. And the one that would be kind of one of the biggest storylines, at least, is Evangel. They were really strong this past year, didn't make as deep of a playoff run. I think the second round they lost to Shaw. But now they have Pop Houston in there and a lot of other guys that have kind of followed and started, as Coach Duran said, they just started showing up again. The talent has started filling those hallways over at Evangel. The E is alive and well. And so as many of those guys that will be stepping into bigger varsity roles than they've seen before, are they ready to make that jump right now? I think Pop Houston is, someone I've seen as much of as anyone, probably is ready to compete at an extremely high level right off the bat. And so how much do they mix things up right there in Shreveport and on a statewide level right off the bat?
Yeah, I think, I'm glad you mentioned Evangel. The thing about Evangel, is that the last few years it seemed like they had a lot, they've had a lot of talent. I mean, of course, you had the Fulgham brothers, you had Tyreek Robinson, Gabe Relaford, was a big time player for them last year. I mean, he was a man among boys, and now it looks like he'll be getting a lot of playing time for the Fighting Tigers of LSU. And this year they returned a lot of talent, but however, they've been disappointed the last few years. You think this is the year where they finally turn around and return to being one of the premier programs in the state?
I think they've got a chance, whether it's this year or next, because I really like the 26 and 27 guys that are kind of funneling through there. And I think they are in most cases, in my opinion, they're kind of ready to take that baton from where that group you mentioned with the 24 class can kind of pass it on to them, and they can keep that momentum rolling. Pop Houston is a guy we've mentioned a bunch. Nathan Green, Johnny Casey, Christian Spates for a guy in the trenches. It's another situation where I know I'll leave somebody out. Charlie Abram. A lot of talent there, both skill wise and in the trenches, that I think they're kind of positioned to. Big Damari Drake, the running back, who I think is one of the top running backs in that class, and so the talent is there for them to make a big leap into actual title contention in the next couple of years, and I think the guys that are there, I have a level of confidence that they might be able to go ahead and do it this year. I'm not, I'm not making any bold predictions yet in May that they go win a state championship, but I think they're a group that is competitive enough, poised enough, football IQ high enough that they have a chance to be further in that mix this year rather than waiting another year for it.
Mm-hmm. And I have one more thing we got to cover because we've been on this for a while, but I want to talk about Catholic for a little bit. Catholic, of course, they return a lot of players. I mean, the Bradford brothers are back. They already make up one of the best defensive backfields in the state. Jaden Miles will be replacing Barry Remo, and he's already picked up offers from Florida State and Ole Miss. I believe most of their offensive lines coming back with Irv Smith, who's one of the more underrated prospects in this state. And they returned two really good receivers, Amari Clayton and Cohen LeBlanc. So they have a lot of athletes. They kind of remind me of the Zachary team from last year, where they have a lot of athletes. But the issue with Zachary was that they didn't have a quarterback really all of last year. There was always switching out, and there's really a lot of uncertainty at that position. The Catholics kind of entering that time, considering the fact they've had a dude who's been there for 4 or 5, 100 years, because Daniel Beal he seems like he's been there forever. And also when you don't and you lose that guy who's been there for the last 4 years, you have a schedule where you have to play at Destrehan, you have to play West Monroe, you have to play U High, and then also your district has gotten better. Central is now a team that a lot of people think is going to be the sleeper team to win that district. So do you think Catholic has a chance to repeat, even though with all the players? I mean, do you think that the quarterback situation may hinder them from going back to back, or do you believe enough in the talent around them to make it back to back for this Catholic Bears team?
Yeah, I think they're a team to watch for sure. You rattled off a lot of great ones, and Jaden Miles is a phenomenal young running back, but he's a young guy too. And so as much as they'll kind of rely on him and then figuring out what the answer is at that quarterback spot, I know, 4 different guys going into the spring are going to get some early opportunities to kind of see how they handled some things. And so we'll see who kind of rises to the forefront over the next few months and how they handle a tough schedule and get ready for a potential playoff run. Because as much as we talk about Daniel Beal and how experienced he was, down the stretch of his career, he'd been there forever. I don't remember for sure, but I think he might have been my confirmation sponsor. Honestly, he's been there so long. He might've been there before I was doing this. But Daniel Beal was a fantastic freshman quarterback for the Bears once upon a time. And so do they have somebody else that's ready to step in and play big enough in a lot of big games along the way? Because they do have a lot else already in place for sure. It's tough for a new quarterback to step in and handle some of the rigors of that schedule, and particularly once you get to playoff time with all those Catholic League opponents. But they're capable, and we'll see, who's ready to step up at that quarterback spot.
Yeah, and apparently they might get Turles and St. Thomas more because this reclassification stuff is really confusing. So who knows who lies in the playoffs for them? Because it seems like every year it's just changing and changing and changing. So the road's only going to get tougher for some of the top teams in the state. But Jerit, thanks for hopping on, my man. Make sure to follow Jerit on Twitter at Jerit Roser. Then also make sure to follow Louisiana versus All. He puts out a lot of content on Twitter. And then he also has his YouTube channel, Louisiana versus All. A lot of great content. And also you can probably buy some of the merch he has because he's wearing a shirt right there. I'm not sure if he has any in stock, but he got some great merch there as well. But anyway, thanks, Jared, for hopping on. Make sure to follow me at Chachere Grant on Twitter, and then also make sure to follow Guru Sports Media on all social media platforms, and make sure to like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel if you're watching this on YouTube. And also this show will be on Spotify as well. But anyway, thanks, Jared. Have a good weekend.
You too, man. Appreciate you.
No problem.